So a buddy of mine saw Jay Bates' video on the sleigh that he did, and he asked me if I could do one. I've never tiled on my 4x4 CNC, and I said sure because that sounded like a challenge, and why not? It came with a lot of headaches, and even on the very first thing that I was trying to do right here. You know when you have good days and bad days? I just noticed this on the backside. I don't know when this happened, but basically, I lost the bearing over here. So I'm no longer connected to that screw. So apparently the set screw that held the lead screw in to the motor backed out. Luckily that was only a 15-minute fix and I was back up and running. Alright, so this is the first file that somebody else created that I cut. I didn't look to see what the feeds were, and I just ran it way too fast for my machine. They were 300 inches per minute, and I don't know how it performed just fine on the first sheet, but my heart was racing. This thing was screaming. So here the second cut starts, and I start to build a little bit of confidence. It's not going to take nearly as long as I thought. This is going smooth, or so I thought. That was very short-lived. The vibration actually allowed the bit to pull down just a little bit, and then it nicked the wood, so I didn't have that clearance, and it dug in really hard. It stalled the router, and then I lost my Z because of all the missteps. So this is where I went back into the programming and slowed everything down. I went to 100 inches per minute, and I went 0.185 inches instead of a quarter-inch depth. I put some extra screws in because I noticed the plywood came back up, which didn't help, and I reset the zero as best as I could. This was really tricky and took a very long time. Somehow, by the grace of anybody watching, I managed to cut it out, and everything lined up just fine. Again, I just the pucker factor was real here, and I learned a lesson. Here's a brief clip of how I have to slide the plywood forward. This is called tiling once again. The section in the front needs to be supported so that it doesn't fall off the machine, obviously, and then everything needs to line up with that 4-foot mark that I made on the plywood going back to where 0 should be. So I made a mark on the bed and the plywood, and that's where they line up. On the first couple of sheets that I did, the tabs weren't there yet because my Z height was off so many times. So I cut it short of the last pass so that I didn't cut all the way through and ruin the sheet of plywood and the sleigh itself. Everything else was just a misset of my Z, so I had to go through and trim a little bit. The jigsaw was the best way to do that. So definitely standing and doing it's better than kneeling over. And you know, you live, you learn, you take a lot of Advil and have a heating pad. All right, the next step is bringing everything over to the router table. I'm using a brand new Amana Tool 47104 flush trim router bit. This thing is awesome. I'm a huge fan of flush router bits. There's very little things that are as satisfying as trimming off just a little bit, whether it's tabs or just that small extra that was attached to the plywood. That I find this very, very enjoyable. Due to the sleigh size, I can't really work on this safely on the router table, so I had to break out the handheld router. A trim router would probably work a little bit better, but I have this full-size guy, which is totally fine. I could use the vacuum to keep the mess down, but honestly, that's more of a hassle because I already have to carry around the extension cord while I'm routing, so I just committed to making a gigantic mess. The depth of this bit is not all the way through, so I can run it on the outside of the table and on top of the table, so I really only need to stop to move the clamps. On the end of my workbench, I have this vise, which I am going to use to hold the wood and drill into the center of the runners for the sleigh and the seats and everything that goes basically in between the two sleigh pieces. I'm using a 5/16 bit, as that is as close as I can get to the exact size of the hardware that I bought, and I'll leave a link to those in the description. While I won't bore you with showing you the details of drilling every hole in all 40 of them, 38 I think actually, I'll speed that up a little bit. All right, now all that's left is sanding. I'm gonna do a quick pass of 320 on all the edges to get the little hairs off. And then there was a couple of spots where the plywood wasn't that great, so I put some wood filler down. I'll sand those off at 220, and then we will start assembly, doing all the accents, doing the box, the steps, and then we will move everything and put up a spray tent. So here on the box, it's very important that you have really tight corners. So I'm going through with this file and getting every corner nice and deep and smooth so that they fit together. If you cut all the way through the board like you're supposed to, the router bit takes care of this, but I didn't. So here I am spending a lot of time on details. So the steps assembly is pretty straightforward. It's a puzzle. Put glue on everything that touches, and then I used some brad nails to secure everything in place on top of that, just to make sure that this stays sturdy for the years and years of use that it will get. So here I'm putting the trim around the sleigh, and I didn't use any glue, and I kick myself almost daily for it. I think about it way too much, but in theory, if they don't move this around too much, it shouldn't be a problem. Nobody's really going to be hanging on it, so it's really when they disassemble it and stack it and reassemble the next year that might be an issue. I've gone back and forth many times to figure out if putting the trim on first and then painting was worth it. I think on a painting perspective, painting everything first and then putting the trim on is the way to go. But what I noticed was that when I did do all the trim, it didn't line up perfectly everywhere. And I think that's because I had a tile. The Z points weren't perfect when it shifted, so some sides are thicker than others. And then also the first sheet cut faster than the rest because I didn't like how it was cutting, so I slowed it down. With it running so fast, it might have been off a little bit. So there's a lot of variables here. I'm not sure if everybody else is going to run into this situation, but I decided that I would indeed put all the trim on so that I could make this flush on the edge. I'll use a sander and 80 grit just to eat away really quickly, and a file for places that I can't get the sander into. So last night I painted this, and I thought there was some small scratches in here. I had a hard time seeing it, but now that I painted it, it really just highlights all these little marks right here. So it sucks, but at the same time, now I can clearly see these swirl marks, and all I need to do is sand the surface down to get below that. I really don't care about the veneer on top. As long as these little scratches get out of it, then I can come through and touch up the nail holes again with some plastic wood, some wood filler. Once that dries in like 3 to 6 hours, I can sand it down. It'll be all nice and smooth and I can paint it again. All right, here's the outside of one side of the sleigh. It's prepped for the gold paint. I'm just waiting for all the touch up of wood filler to dry so that I can sand that down. Basically, I covered all the nail holes. I covered up a little bit of the seams where the 4 pieces of wood that do the trim touch, and then some other scratches and stuff, because this is the outside of the sleigh. I wanted it to look as nice as possible. Probably a little overkill for what most people will even pay attention to. They're probably just going to jump to this thing, snap a picture, and then leave and never look at it again. But the idea is that I get a return client and possibly referrals out of this. So I will do a little bit of extra. Like I mentioned before, I went back and forth on the best way to do this, whether painting it first and then painting the trim and then put the trimming on second, was going to be any better than doing it the way I am now. And the only reason I'm doing it this way is because I noticed that when I put the trim around, the trim didn't exactly line up with the main board in places, so I had to sand them together. And I'm pretty happy with how this turned out so far. Now, taping it is kind of rough. But I want to show you how I did that. And basically, the bottom is pretty self-explanatory. So we got a straight line here on the very bottom, and then I came in on the edges because I want the tape to actually touch the board. So this part I'm not too worried about just yet. I'll take my painter's tape and touch it down in a couple of spots so that I don't worry about it moving too much. So again, the bottom is nice and straight. So traditional laying of tape down here goes well. Just line it up with the very edge and slap it in. No trimming required. Now it's okay if, I know you can't really see, but if you put the tape on the very edge and you can see the corner, I'm okay with that getting painted gold. Because what I'm going to do is come back over and put tape on this flat edge all the way around for when I paint this red. And that's when I'll get really picky about this corner. But right now I'd rather have gold all the way in. That way, if I do mess up that red a little bit, there'll be some gold behind it and you really won't see it. And again, it's not like anybody's going to be paying that close attention to the sled. It's strictly for pictures at a soiree. So when it comes to here, it's a curve. So we're going to take small pieces and push it down. And you want it to butt up against. And I want some tape on this edge here. So the more, the tighter the curve, the smaller the pieces. So like up here, I'll get really, really tiny pieces. Along this is a nice sweeping curve, and I can use longer pieces. So I'm putting it in the corner and then pushing down into that edge and trying to get my nail in there so it gets a nice tight 90. Here. This one's pretty tight, so I want to keep these ones short. What happens if it's too long, it won't stick to the very edge. I realize this is probably the wrong angle for you, so we'll do it up here too. Again, I don't want this to be seen, or I don't want it on top. I want the tape to touch the wood, so I'll cut it short. And I'll stick it in there. Like I said, I want all the focus to be on this first, and then I can lay that flat. And as you can see, the big sections go pretty quick. It's those tighter ones where you got to make smaller little pieces, especially up here in this little curly Q area. That's not fun. I think what I did over there was I basically did tape on the inside because it's not really worth the time cutting this and then taping it into spots. When you get to the edge here, take your razor blade, slice up, and then lay that nice and flat. Now, when it comes to cutting, after you get everything marked, run your finger on the very edge, take this, and then you come right into the corner. And I'd rather be lower on the table or on the plywood than on the raised section of wood. Again, for this one, I want the gold to be all the way down as far as possible. And since I laid each piece on top of each other in this direction, if I pull it from this side, I'm going to get one piece at a time. But if I go from this side, I might get lucky and get one after the other. Sometimes it breaks. But these big pieces are much more manageable than doing individuals. And that's it. When you're dealing with in here, again, it sucks. You just cut very small pieces, shove it down as best as you can in your finger. Try to get this inside to cut. It's not going to be perfect. And it's going to be really bad when I do the red, because I have to do the same thing. I have to take little tiny pieces of tape, get it lined up on that edge, inside edge, and trim it again with the razor blade. I'm not looking forward to that. This will be easier. That's going to be the hardest part for sure. So without a doubt, the taping took forever, both on this and when I go to do the red. Probably multiple hours spent on taping, and that's not really a good use of time, but I don't know if it would have been better to spray first and then put it all together. There would have been a lot of touch up with the paint afterwards where the nail marks are. I don't think that would have been cost effective as far as time goes. I don't know. I'd probably do it the same way if I had another commission. I think the only thing I would change is instead of going through like 4 cans of spray paint, I would get some gold and spray with my sprayer. There is nothing more professional feeling when you can lay a good paint, and every time I use my sprayer, I just absolutely love the process. Nothing fancy here with the paint. This is just Rust-Oleum paint that I added a little bit of water to help thin it out so it would spray better. I think I was using about 6 ounces of paint and then an ounce of water. And what that did was cause me to use multiple coats, but it sprayed very well and everybody absolutely loved it. All the paint looks great. Now it's time to do the red on the interior and the outside, which is this. But in order to tape that up, you take your tape and just lay it flat against the surface here, and then work it around. Now there will be spots where the tape will not touch all the way, and you will get some red. Well, being that I'm taping this and painting it red, there will be some red on the very edge of this gold, but you will not see that, I guarantee it. When it comes to here, and there's some sticking up, take a razor blade and make some slices, and then you can fold it over. Just be careful not to cut this far. If you cut into there, then obviously you got to put a little bit of tape on top. And then if you go back through, fold all the corners down, and you're solid. All right, so here's the incredibly awkward task of assembling this gigantic sleigh with one person. I believe that everything will look best if I have the slot and the nut, the barrel nut, if I have that slot facing down, so on top you see a nice flat surface. All right, so far 1 out of 3 holes, or 1 out of 4, I had to realign. All right, so 3 of these holes didn't need adjusting, but the rest did. That's all my fault. It's not the program or anything like that of the sleigh. What happened was, when you drill these holes, if they're not perfectly straight, when everything else is square, this doesn't line up. So you have to put it in where it needs to go, and then figure out what angle the bolt is coming through down here. So, or if, you know, just like that too, it's like as soon as it got painted, now the bolt doesn't go through. So all I'm doing is running this down, the drill, into the hole, and changing where it comes out. So this one's actually pretty centered, But what might happen is maybe it's pointing one side that way or one side that way. Honestly, this one looks pretty good. But it did get paint in there when I painted it, so the fibers swelled. Now this one, you can see it's kind of over to that side a little bit, so what I'm gonna have to do is come in on an angle to make that more centered. It doesn't take a lot to put it back on, but it's just time consuming. So I might as well do this other side real quick too. This part of the build is a lot more time consuming than I expected. Oh man, all right. So just taking that little bit of extra time saved me a ton. I only have to rework this one hole. What's not shown here is after I spray everything red, I went back with a clear coat. It's a matte clear coat, so it doesn't even look like it's on there. But for two reasons. One, I didn't want people's clothes to have paint on it. And two, it's just a common courtesy. When you paint something, you should protect it with clear coat. Well, it's done. This was a lot harder than I thought it would be. I'm tired. My back hurts. Everything in my garage has a tint of red because of how much paint it took to do this. My poor little booth, spray booth, which I thought was too large, definitely only fit like a portion of this into it. It's the biggest thing I've ever done. I'm charging the most money to date, and it presented its own challenges. I'm not 100% happy with it because I'm a perfectionist, but I can proudly say that I did it. The files were great from Jay, thank you. I added a couple of screw holes around the vectors that allowed me to screw the plywood to my spoil board so it didn't move. And that was it. If you get the files, which I'll link in the description, make sure that you change the feeds and speeds. Jay had them set up for his monster machine, which was running like 300 inches per minute. And that is just too fast for my machine. So I toned it down to 100 inches per minute. And then I also, even though I was using a 1/4 inch bit, I turned it down to 5 passes. And it took longer to cut everything out, but my machine's not strong enough to drag that for that long. And what ended up happening was it would lose a step and started cutting, so I lost an entire sheet of plywood, which is expensive. So yeah, if you want to do this, please let me know how yours turns out. Tag me in the video or your Instagram or whatever. I would like to see it. It'd mean a lot to me if if you found value here, to like and subscribe and possibly share this video. If you'd like to learn more about the tiling process, I'm going to do a separate video linked right over here. Give that a click and let me know if this helps.